Welcome back, everyone. This is Jface Games. What we're doing is we're talking about different RPGs. We're looking at the mechanics that I like really about them because I'm going to build my own RPG and I plan on borrowing the influence of these RPGs and these different mechanics. And so today we are talking about the Cypher system. To be honest, I've known about Numenera for a long time by name and general concept, that it was kind of fantasy with a sci-fi blend. I had no idea what the system was like. I thought it was a spin-off of like a Dungeons and Dragons, something, one of the different editions. I had no idea. And it's a completely different genre of game, and it is awesome. There's some really cool things in this system. So let's go ahead and start talking about them. So first off, there is a fantastic, just like I talked about in the 2 videos ago on how Fate has a great DC ladder, this system also has a fantastic DC table, right? In essence, it's like, I should put a link in here, but in essence, it is a DC table ranging from 3 to 30, I think, and it gives you an idea of what it would take to accomplish those. And what's crazy about this game is that when it's your turn and you're a player, all you're doing is rolling 1d20. That's it. And so you ask yourself, well, how am I supposed to beat a DC 30 with 1d20? Well, the whole point of this game, or mechanically in this game, is that the DM's going to set a DC, and then you're going to do as much as you can as a player creatively and within the mechanics of the game to lower that DC, so that then you can roll your d20 and get above it. That's the mechanics. And so there are lots of different things you can do to try and lower that DC so that you can succeed. So, but first off, they have this great DC table that is in essence, let me write this down right here, that you multiply the DC by 3, then the player has to roll. So I might have the DC table here. Might have to, here we go, task difficulty. So this gives you an idea. Here are the tasks, and this is the number, and this ends up being so I choose a difficulty between 0 to 10 as the DM. It then creates the target number DC for the player, 0 to 30, increments of 3. And they do what they can to try and, they're in essence trying to decrease the task difficulty, right? So let's talk about the rest of the mechanics. One thing I really loved about this was the stats are actually pools of points. So first off, you have 3 stats. It's always kind of nice to simplify things, so I like that it's a little bit more simplistic in that way. You have might, you have speed, and you have intellect. Okay, that's it. And these end up being stat pools, or stat pools of points, right? So if my might is 11, that means I have 11 might points. My speed is 6, that means I have 6, etc., etc. Well, what's really cool is that not only, there's a double-edged sword here, because these points not only represent my ability to lower the DC, because I can use them to do things to lower the DC for my target number, but also your stat pools are your damage. They're your health. Damage to your stat pools. These stat pools are your health. If your stat pools ever get to 0 across the board, you're dead. That's it. And there are severe penalties if your stat pools get to 0 in certain ones and not the others. Not to mention that if your stat pool ever gets to 0 in might and you're a fighter, that means your ability to lower DCs and do different feats and etc., it's gone because your might's 0 and you're taking penalties. So I love that. I love the idea that your attributes, your stats, are actual points that you then use to modify the DC and to make yourself better at what you're doing. So it's like exerting yourself. But by exerting yourself, you're also pushing yourself closer to being knocked out or injured, because when you take damage, you take it to one of these stat pools and you get minuses to your stat pools. Awesome. Awesome concept. Players roll everything. I've been wondering about this for a while, in the idea that how much should I be rolling as the DM versus the players? I think that sometimes I think that sometimes I've been in as the DM with a lot of monsters around, and if it's my turn as the DM and all my monsters go on my turn, depending on the system you're playing, they might be mixed up in there. Well, it just takes forever possibly for the players, especially if it's not a fast like virtual tabletop that can automate stuff. And so it's really nice to think about that the players roll everything, even their defense. So instead of you attacking with a monster, they are defending on their turn. I like that. I like the idea of putting it more, and so then the DM can focus more on the narrative. And to go with this, which is cool, is that they have static damage, right? Meaning that if I hit with a monster, or if you hit with a two-handed weapon versus, one-handed weapon, the damage is the same. Monsters and weapons all have static damage. What you can do is you can add effort to your damage, and effort comes from those pools. So you could also spend points to try and do more damage. And there's more of a nuance to this. I'm not going to go into all the concepts of effort and how you can reduce dice pools, or reduce DCs. The main concept here is I like the idea that you have a stat pool. You can use those stats to make you do more damage. You can use those stats to make it easier for you to succeed, but that's your health. That's kind of scary. I like that they have the idea of minor and major effects. So it's not just a crit and you do something awesome, but because that's only 5% of the time on a D20. Minor effect you do on a 19, right? And so minor effects are much more simplistic. They might be like trips or stuff like that, and major effects could be like massive damage. So there's a list, but I like the idea that there are a couple different milestones or different targets you could hit to do different stuff. What else do we got? What else do we got here? Because there's a lot of cool stuff in this game. Let's talk about some of those. Let's actually talk about some of those things in terms of like how a player can adjust stuff with their abilities. Whoops. So in essence, a player can modify their DC, right? And there's a couple different things they can do. One, they can have skills. And so if you want to go down one step, which one step being go from a difficulty 4 to a difficulty 3, you spend 1 point. But remember that since every DC is a multiplier of 3, that if I go from a difficulty 4 to a difficulty 3, that's going from a 12 on a D20 roll to a 9. That's a big difference, right? That's 15% improvement in my success rate. And if you're a specialist in it, meaning that like you're a fighter and this is a might thing and this is a fight, whatever, you then can do 2 steps, which is huge. I mean, that's 30% improvement in your success. All right. Then you have assets, which is maybe you have some sort of equipment that also helps you. So that's another way of reducing the DC. Okay. So now you have, I'm going to use skill points or a skill to reduce the step. I'm going to use equipment to help me reduce the step. And then finally you have effort. Okay. So I apologize. The skill is you actually have a skill. Like I am a fighter. So this is passive. So these first 2 are passive. So I am skilled in fighting, so I can reduce the DC by 1. I'm a specialist at fighting. I reduce the DC by 2. I have a weapon that is very helpful in this. I reduce it. Now it's reduced by 3 steps. But then this is when I can apply effort. This is when I can drain my stat pool, right? I can drain my stat pool to reduce the amount of the DC. So I can take the DC down 1 for every 3 points from my stat pool. But then I can go additional 1 DCs for every 2 points after that. So in other words, I could take the DC down another 2 points if I spent 5 of my stat pool, my effort. That's tough. Now, they have things called edges, which edges are like feats or other things that you can take on, that when you take them, it reduces this cost here from 3 points to 2 or 2 to 1, etc. And then effort is capped. So if I'm a first level fighter, I'm not going to be able to just like burn all of my might to get a, take a 20 DC down to a 1 or something like that. That's just not feasible. And so it's capped. But so this is the system. DC comes out, the DM just says, look, this is, oops, I don't have it there. Look, this is really difficult. So it's a 4. Starts off with a 12, okay? Meanwhile, you're a fighter. You're not a specialist, but you're a fighter. So you take it from a 4 to a 3. And then on top of that, you have a piece of equipment that helps. So it takes it to a 2. Get above a 6 on a D20. all right, sure, I'll go for it. Or I say, you know what, I'm going to burn 3 points, make it a challenge 1. So I just got to get above a 3. Let's go for it. So that's the way you can kind of play with that and modify it. Really cool concept. I really like it. It's got a lot of cool ideas, and I love that it's just very narrative for the players and the GM. The GM especially. The GM gets to sit back and spend a little bit more time thinking about the mechanics, or thinking about the story. And so also in that is that the GM has invokes. So if you've ever played, Fate, we talked about Fate, and we talked about the mechanics going back and forth with invoking aspects. That's another way that there's a currency in that game called Fate points, and the GMs can kind of invoke the players. And in essence, it's giving the player a challenge, and if the player accepts that challenge, they take a point, so they now have something that'll help them later. If they decline the challenge, then they have to give up a point, I think, in Fate. In this game, what's really cool is that the GM can invoke things on you to give you challenges, and the ante-up is experience. So you can get more experience, but if you don't take the invoke, I think that you get loss of experience. So that's cool. I think that's really cool. Anyways, I thought that was really nice. And then finally, the last thing in this system that's kind of cool is I like their character creation. I like how they have very simple concepts here in terms of you choose a type, a general type, like an archetype, and then you have flavor that you add to them, then a full descriptor, and then you get into the actual focuses and abilities. And what this does is this flushes out, in essence, we'll take a look real quick. So if I look here, you've got types, warrior, and then you have an adept. And so it gives you these nice little, like, this is what it is, this is what it would be depending on the setting you're kind of going for. This is what your starting stat pools might be, etc. It gives you a nice little flush out. But what's really cool about these, what's really nice about this game too, is we talked about customization in games and how we like that, is that they have a huge feat system in this game. There's a ton of feats, and you can see here all of the different stuff that gets referenced at different tiers or different levels for your character and what you might be able to then use. And that's just in your type. But when you get into these other things like flavor and distinction, so flavor, once again, if you're stealth flavored, look, here's more feats that you then have access to at different tiers. It's crazy. I mean, the amount of detail that went into this leveling system, I'd say that there's probably more optionality here than Pathfinder 2. And I thought when I saw Pathfinder 2 the first time that I was like, this is blowing me away. Descriptors, same thing. Well, these are a little bit more like feats, like general feats, but they give you like pluses here, pluses and minuses. Cool concept. And then I think it goes into the focuses and abilities. So here are your focuses, and focuses are, once again, giant pools of feats, right? So each one of these is a giant pool of feet. So in essence, now these are much more like you choose one or the other, or maybe you can build multiple, but the idea here being that by the end of the day, when you've chosen your character, this might seem overwhelming at first, but the nice thing is because of these descriptors of what they are, you shouldn't focus in on here. You should focus in on the story, the character you want to build, and then go there, because after the fact, it's going to be, you're going to have these massive feat pools that then you can add together, but you're basing it based off of the story that you kind of created for that character. Let's go to abilities real quick just to kind of finish this off, because I think this is neat. Oh, here we go. All right, so now abilities. Now abilities are, in essence, these are everything you've seen that I've been describing as feats. Those are abilities. And so I was using the wrong term, but when you went to your type, you chose your type, and your type gave you what are my basic stat pools, and then what are the feats or what are the abilities that are open to me at every level. Then you go to your flavor, and your flavor, once again, opens up different abilities. Then you go to your descriptor, and your descriptor gives you more like pluses and bonuses. Then you go to your focus, and your focus is another way of describing your character that gives you more abilities. And then here is, in essence, where those abilities are listed out. So you can get an idea of what all those abilities are, where they kind of fall. So it's amazing. I think that this game system is pretty phenomenal. It has a lot of... It's interesting how it's all on the player to roll everything and to try and manage the DCs. And to use your stat pools to make sure that, talk about risk reward. This is the biggest like risk reward scenario. Do I really want to succeed high on this one or not, etc. And then the fact that when you have that character creation, the flavor is just so robust. And you can really use storytelling to drive into which ones you're choosing. And then you have these nice arsenals of abilities that you can choose from. So yeah, Cypher system is pretty awesome. There's a lot to think about in terms of these systems so far that we've gone through. Once again, leave some comments in below, hit the little bell, and hit the subscribe button. I'll see you guys later.